Have you ever felt that the truth is hiding behind a good heart? I saw how a father's gut feeling saved his life. I'm going to tell you a story from Madrid that will make you realize that betrayal can come from the person you love the most. Imagine your own son, the one you raised and loved, asks you to sign some papers. A simple signature, but a feeling deep down tells you not to do it. And in a second, you decide to fake an illness to escape a trap. That's what happened to Don Alvaro. Today, I'll show you how a single act of caution can be the key to protecting your life from a great deception. And I'll give you a warning that will help you defend yourself from betrayal. Every second counts in this story, because broken trust is a wound that can take a lifetime to heal. If you ignore this lesson, you risk losing everything. Stay with me until the end to see what Don Alvaro discovered. You won't believe what his own son was asking him to sign. I don't usually share personal stories online, but something happened not long ago that's been sitting heavy on my chest. My name is Alvaro. I'm 78 years old, and I live alone in a small but proud apartment in the south of Madrid, the kind of place where the neighbors still greet each other, and the bread shop owner knows your name. I lost my wife Teresa 9 years ago, cancer, and since then, I've built a routine that keeps me anchored. Morning coffee, market strolls, feeding the pigeons at the park, and a glass of red wine with the radio in the evening. It's a quiet life. Not grand, but it's mine. Every corner of this apartment holds a memory. Every crack in the floor tells a story. My son, Alejandro, is 47. Good kid. At least that's what I've always believed. He runs a small import business, or tries to, and I know times have been rough for him. We see each other almost every Sunday. He brings those supermarket desserts I don't like, and I make lentils the way he used to love as a child. Lately, though, he's been showing up more than usual, always with this nervous smile, fiddling with his car keys, eyes darting like he's rehearsing lines in his head. Each time it's a new story. A shipment stuck in customs, a partner who disappeared, a loan he can't repay. I've helped him out more times than I can count. Never large amounts, but they add up. I started dipping into my emergency savings, the kind you tell yourself is only for medical needs or the day the heater dies for good. Still, it's Alejandro. He's my only child. If I don't help him, who will? That's how I justified it. That's how a lot of parents justify things, I suppose. But the last time he came over, something shifted. Something didn't sit right. It was last Thursday, a warm afternoon, sun bouncing off the terracotta roofs outside. I had just come back from the market with a bag of cherries when I heard the doorbell. Alejandro was there, but he wasn't alone. A man in a gray suit stood next to him. Not young, not old, just that polished, stiff kind of lawyer look. Briefcase in hand, no small talk. My stomach turned immediately. Alejandro said, "Papa, this is just a little paperwork. It'll help keep everything in order in case something happens to you." I asked what kind of paperwork. The lawyer started talking in fast, dry legalese. Terms like guardianship, asset protection, financial delegation. My eyes glazed over. I've always been good with my hands, not with legal documents. But what caught my attention was Alejandro. He was sweating. Not from the heat, from something else. He wasn't meeting my eyes. My instinct, sharpened by years on construction sites and dealing with slippery contractors, screamed at me to stall. So I did something I'm not proud of, but I think it saved me. I dropped the bag of cherries to the floor, clutched my chest and said, "Lo siento, I'm not feeling well. Something's wrong." I stumbled toward the kitchen chair, faking a cough, a bit of wheezing. The lawyer clicked his tongue in annoyance and Alejandro knelt beside me, panicked. "Papa, are you okay? Should I call someone?" I shook my head and whispered that I needed to lie down, that it was just a bad spell, nothing serious. They left after a few awkward minutes. The lawyer said they'd return next week and Alejandro promised to bring soup. As soon as the door clicked shut, I sat up straight and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking, but not from age, from fear, not just of what they tried to make me sign, but of what it might mean, that my own son could be hiding something from me, that maybe, just maybe, he had already crossed a line. I didn't sleep that night. I kept turning the papers over in my head, even though I hadn't seen them. What kind of streamlining needs a stranger in a suit and my signature under pressure? Why the rush? Why the performance? That's when I made a decision. If they thought I was too weak to think clearly, maybe that could work in my favor. I would. Play along. Pretend to be worse than I was. Let them believe I was fading. And in that time, I would find out the truth. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, even before the pigeons started pacing around my window ledge. I took my usual walk to the park but moved slower, dragging my feet a little, stopping to cough now and then in front of neighbors. I wasn't acting for them. I just needed to feel how convincing it would be if I had to keep it up. On the way back, I stopped at the pharmacy and picked up a cheap walking cane, even though my knees still worked just fine. It wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about surviving something I didn't fully understand yet. By noon, Alejandro had called twice. I let it ring. Then he messaged, "You scared me yesterday, let me know if you need anything." I replied with a simple, "Just resting." It wasn't like him to worry so much. He usually disappeared for days between visits. That's when the alarms in my head got louder. I knew I needed help, someone I could trust. That same afternoon, I took the 34 bus to Chambéry to see someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Don Fermin, my old friend and retired lawyer. Fermin used to defend small construction firms back in the day. We met in the 80s when a subcontractor tried to cheat us out of materials, and he handled it like a matador in court. He's the kind of man who always smells faintly of pipe tobacco and keeps every document he's ever signed in neatly labeled folders. When I showed up at his door, leaning on my new cane and looking every bit the frail grandfather, he raised one eyebrow and said, "Don't tell me you're dying, Alvaro, or I'll have to lend you a suit." I didn't smile. I just asked if we could talk inside. Over strong coffee and the sound of pigeons cooing outside his tiny balcony, I told him everything. Alejandro, the lawyer, the rushed documents, the tightness in my chest when I heard words like guardianship. Fermin didn't interrupt. He listened the way a doctor does, to symptoms, not emotions. Then he sighed and said, "Do you have any idea what they were trying to make you sign?" I shook my head. He tapped his index finger on the table. "Then we find out." He asked me for every detail, name of the lawyer, what he looked like, anything I could remember. I had seen the man's business card still sitting on the entry table at home, white with blue serif letters. I told Fermin I'd bring it tomorrow. Before I left, he said, something that stuck with me. "You did the right thing pretending. You bought yourself time. That's more than most people get." When I got home, I sat in my favorite chair, the one with the worn armrest where Teresa used to rest her hand, and looked around. This apartment isn't worth a fortune, but it's my life. The tiles I chose myself. The balcony railing I reinforced with my own hands. The photos of Teresa by the hallway. I couldn't shake the thought. How close had I come to losing all of it with a single signature? That night, Alejandro called again. I answered with a weak voice. He asked if I was feeling any better. I told him I was still dizzy, hadn't eaten much. He sounded concerned, maybe genuinely, or maybe just afraid I wouldn't sign what he needed in time. He said, "Take your time, Papa. We'll go over everything again when you feel up to it." I told him that sounded good. Then I hung up and stared at the ceiling for an hour, heart racing. I didn't feel old until that week. Not really. But suddenly, I was navigating something I couldn't build or fix with a wrench. This was about trust, and I was starting to suspect the person I trusted most might have seen me more as a liability than a father. That kind of suspicion is like mold. Once it starts, it spreads into every memory, every conversation. And the worst part is, you still want to believe you're wrong. The next morning, I tucked the lawyer's business card into my shirt pocket and headed back to Fermin's. And Doc took the long way around, avoiding familiar corners where I might run into neighbors. I didn't want anyone asking why I looked perfectly fine if just days ago I was gasping for air. When I arrived, Fermin was already on the phone. He gave me a nod, then pointed to a chair. His voice was calm but firm, like a man who knew which rocks to turn over and how hard to press. After hanging up, he told me the lawyer, Sergio Valcarcel, was part of a firm that handled elderly financial restructuring. That sounded innocent enough, but then Fermin showed me something on his laptop. Several complaints online buried in legal forums and senior rights blogs. Words like coercion, abuse of authority, transfer of property without informed consent. It sent a cold current down my spine. These weren't isolated cases. They had a pattern, a tactic. Fermin leaned back and said, "This is how they do it. They come in looking polished, throw around terms, exploit the fear of age and illness, They count on people not asking questions. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I asked him flat out, "So what was my son trying to get me to sign?" He hesitated, then said, "We won't know for sure until we get a copy of the document, but I have a very strong suspicion, and you're not going to like it." He explained that based on similar cases, the papers likely included two key components. One, a medical declaration stating I was becoming mentally or physically unfit to manage my own affairs. And two, a power of attorney granting Alejandro full legal control over my assets. My apartment, my bank accounts, everything. The combination would allow him to sell, withdraw, liquidate, and I wouldn't be able to stop him. My mouth went dry. "He wouldn't do that to me," I muttered. "Alejandro's not like that." Fermin didn't push back. He just gave me a look I'd seen before, the look of a man who's had to deliver bad news many times. "Let's just confirm everything," he said. "We'll request a draft copy of the documents from the firm, acting as your legal representative. They'll assume you're interested again." That night I couldn't eat. The smell of the lentil stew I reheated turned my stomach. I sat at the table, staring at the empty chair where Teresa used to sit, wondering what she would have done. She always had sharper instincts than me. She used to say, "Listen to the silences, Alvaro. That's where the truth hides." Now, in Alejandro's silences, I heard fear, urgency, and something darker I couldn't name. 2 days later, Fermin called. The firm had emailed the documents, attached in a PDF, ready for review. I went to his apartment immediately. He printed them out, all 12 pages. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Right there, on page 6, a clause stating that Alejandro would become my appointed guardian, effective immediately, should I experience a decline in health or capacity to manage financial affairs. And worse, page 9 contained an addendum with my apartment listed as a transferable asset, available for liquidation if required for the ward's well-being. I stared at it for what felt like forever. My name, my address, my life, reduced to a negotiable item on a legal form. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, over and over, while Fermin silently slid me a glass of water and said, "Now you understand why pretending was the smartest thing you could have done." I walked home slower than usual that afternoon. It wasn't the cane or the heat. It was the weight of knowing. Every step echoed with the realization that Alejandro, my son, had made a decision without me. Not just a bad one, a betrayal, the kind that doesn't scream, but settles in your bones like a slow poison. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Was I too generous? Too trusting? Or did he think I was already halfway gone, like some worn-out relic collecting dust? Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for what must have been an hour. The wallpaper near the corner was peeling slightly. I had meant to fix it for years. Now it looked like my life, intact from afar, but unraveling if you looked too close. I didn't cry. Not then, but something inside me collapsed. Not from sadness, from disbelief. Alejandro had always been the boy with the scraped knees who held my hand during thunderstorms. How did we get here? That evening, I played the voicemail he'd left while I was with Fermin. His voice was calm, careful. "Papa, just checking in. I talked to the lawyer again. He says everything can be rescheduled. No pressure, okay? We just want what's best for you." We. That word hit differently now. It wasn't just him. It was him in the suit, him in the plan, him in the lie. I played the message again, this time noticing the slight hesitation before he said, "No pressure." It wasn't worry. It was calculation. I decided not to respond. Not yet. I needed time. But more than that, I needed control. That's when I realized the only thing protecting me right now was the illusion of frailty. If Alejandro believed I was slipping, mentally, physically, he wouldn't expect me to push back. He'd wait. He'd stall. And that gave me a window. I'd keep pretending, but not to punish, to protect myself, my home, my dignity. Over the next few days, I doubled down on the act. I answered the phone in a groggy voice. I asked him to repeat things as if I didn't catch them the first time. I mentioned forgetting my keys even though they were in my pocket. It wasn't easy. Every lie tasted bitter, but it worked. Alejandro began slowing his approach. He didn't bring up the documents again. He suggested maybe we should Pause things until I was feeling better. I agreed. Meanwhile, Fermin moved quietly behind the scenes. He drafted a document revoking any prior verbal agreements and blocking any future legal authority unless granted through a notarized declaration, signed in sound mind and body. We had it, filed that same week, quietly, legally, irrevocably. For the first time in days, I slept with both eyes closed. But the hardest part wasn't the act, or the paperwork, or the pretending. It was facing the truth every morning when I brushed my teeth, looking in the mirror and knowing the person who tried to strip me of everything wasn't a stranger. It was the person I'd raised, bathed, fed, defended, the boy I carried on my shoulders at Retiro Park, the teenager I cried over at Teresa's funeral. That's a pain no lawyer can prepare you for. Still, even in that pain, there was clarity. I knew now what I was dealing with, and once you see the mask fall, even once, you can never unsee it. Alejandro hadn't asked for help. He'd made a move, a calculated, well-dressed, softly spoken ambush, and the only thing that saved me was instinct, and maybe a little bit of acting. A few days later, I decided to test the waters. I invited Alejandro over for lunch, told him I was feeling a bit better, and had managed to heat up some soup. He arrived with a worried smile and a bag of groceries I didn't ask for, organic this and that, things he knew I never bought. He looked around the apartment like he was checking inventory. I watched him from the kitchen doorway, leaning a little on my cane, feigning just enough fragility to keep the performance believable. During lunch, I played my part. I asked him to remind me how long ago his business partner had left. I acted surprised when he said it. Had already been 8 months. Time flies, doesn't it? I mumbled, stirring my spoon absent-mindedly. He nodded, studying me. He was measuring how much of me was still sharp, how much I remembered, how much I suspected. I could feel it in the pauses, in the way his eyes flicked toward the drawer where I used to keep important documents. He brought up the lawyer again, carefully, said they were still willing to support us if I needed. It's just a matter of being prepared, Papa. You never know when your health will really start declining. I let the spoon fall into the bowl and blinked at him slowly. Declining? I whispered. I feel tired sometimes, but I'm not dead yet. He raised his hands in apology. No, I didn't mean it like that. Just practical things. That's all. I changed the subject, asked him about his business. He gave me the same vague answers, the same excuses wrapped in optimism. It was like watching a man dig himself out of quicksand with a plastic spoon. I didn't press. I just listened, because now, every word he said was evidence. Not for a courtroom, for my own understanding, for the decision I knew was coming, one that no father ever wants to make. After he left, I called Fermin and told him everything. He's playing the long game, I said. He's being patient, waiting for the right moment. Fermin didn't sound surprised. They often do, especially the ones who still want to appear like the good son. But don't forget, he already crossed the line. Whether he steps back or not doesn't erase that. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My mind was already racing toward the next step. That evening, I pulled out an old photo album. Not the ones on the shelf for guests. The real one. The one with bent corners and notes scribbled in Teresa's handwriting. Alejandro as a baby, in his first walker. At the beach with sand all over his face. In my arms at age 6. Asleep after watching a movie too late. I stared at those images for hours, trying to reconcile them with the man who almost erased me with a pen. You want to believe you raised someone better, that no matter how life hits them, they'll never turn on you. But sometimes, desperation rewires people. It doesn't excuse anything, but it explains why the knife came from the one hand you never guarded against. And in that realization, there's grief, not just for the betrayal, but for the person you thought they still were. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my chair, by the window watching the city hum below, lights flickering like little confessions. I kept hearing Teresa's voice in my head, her quiet wisdom echoing. Protect yourself, Alvaro, even from those you love. And for the first time in my life, I understood what she meant, not just in theory, but in blood and breath. The next day, I went to the notary's office, the same one where Teresa and I had signed the apartment deed years ago. The smell of old paper and lemon floor cleaner hadn't changed. I asked for an appointment, but the clerk recognized me and let me wait in the back. When it was my turn, I explained my situation to a younger notary named Marta. She listened carefully, respectful but alert, and asked if I had any current legal documents granting power of attorney to my son. I told her I hadn't signed anything, and she smiled, relieved. Then it's still yours, all of it. But if I were you, I'd lock things down properly, just in case someone tries to take advantage of your good faith. That phrase, good faith, stuck with me all afternoon. She helped me draft a declaration stating that any future legal action regarding my estate required my physical presence and a psychiatric evaluation, confirming my full awareness. She said it wasn't standard, but it was possible. I signed it. Afterward, I felt lighter, not happy, not yet, but secure, like I'd patched a hole in the boat before the water started rushing in. On the way home, I stopped at the same bakery where I used to buy Teresa's favorite rosquillas. I bought 2 even though I didn't want any. I just needed something familiar in my hands, something real, something that didn't lie. That weekend, Alejandro didn't show up. No calls, no messages, just silence. It didn't surprise me. Maybe he was waiting to regroup, or maybe he had sensed something, but I didn't chase him. I let the silence stretch. I let him wonder, because now I wasn't the one afraid. He was, and I needed him to feel that, to know that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't weak, and that I wasn't going to sign anything ever again without knowing exactly what it meant. On Monday, I called him, calm, gentle, as if nothing had changed. I said I had found an old photo album and wanted to show it to him. It reminded me of some things, I said. He hesitated, then said, "Sure, Papa. I'll come tomorrow." His tone was cautious but curious. Maybe he thought the door was open again. Maybe he believed the act. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to say to him, but I knew it would be the truth. The next day, I laid the album open on the kitchen table. Teresa's notes in the margins, the sunlit photos from Asturias, Alejandro's handwriting as a child, all there, in full view. When he arrived, he looked surprised to see me dressed and alert. No cane, no coughing, just me, the real me. I saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. Then he smiled. "You look better," he said. I nodded. "I've been thinking a lot." We sat together flipping pages. He laughed at some memories, softened at others, and for a moment it almost felt normal again, like we were just a father and son, sharing pieces of a life. But then I turned the page to a photo of Teresa holding him as a baby, and I said, "She'd be ashamed, you know." His smile faded. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. I met his gaze, steady. "Of what you tried to do, of how close you came to stealing everything she and I built." His face turned pale. "Papa, I raised my hand. Don't lie to me. I know what was in those papers. I know what Sergio Valcarcel does, and I know it wasn't about helping me. It was about helping yourself." He tried to speak, but no words came. Just silence. Heavy, loud, final. I closed the album and said, "The only reason I didn't press charges is because I needed to see for myself what kind of man you'd become." He looked down, ashamed. I added quietly, "Now I know." Alejandro sat frozen for a long moment. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, like he was holding back everything at once: anger, shame, regret, or maybe just panic from being caught. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were glassy. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, almost in a whisper. "I was desperate. The business, everything's falling apart. I thought if I could just keep the apartment secure, maybe sell it, I could." I interrupted him with a wave of my hand. "You thought you could gamble my life for yours? That's not desperation, Alejandro. That's cowardice." He lowered his head and rubbed his temples. "I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't think you'd find out so fast." That line hit me harder than he probably intended. So that was it. He didn't regret the act, only that I caught it in time. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking from the long sit. "You didn't count on your father still having a few working neurons, did you?" He shook his head, defeated. "I was wrong. I know. But please, Papa, I still care. About you." I panicked. "I didn't mean to betray you." I gave him a long, cold stare. "But you did. And what scares me the most is that I don't think you would have stopped if I hadn't played sick. You were ready to bury me while I was still breathing." He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand again. I didn't want excuses, I wanted the truth. and in his silence I already had it. I pointed to the door. "You can leave now." His eyes widened like a child punished without warning. "Papa," he pleaded. I stayed quiet. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him like a man who had seen the last spark of trust extinguished. Slowly he stood, walked to the hallway, and paused at the threshold. "Will you ever forgive me?" he asked without turning around. I answered without hesitation. "That's not up to me. That's up to who you choose to be after today." He left. The door clicked shut with the softest thud I've ever heard, but it echoed louder than any slam. I stood there for a moment, alone in the apartment that was nearly stolen from me. The air felt different, clean, but heavier somehow. I went to the window, pulled it open, and let in the Madrid breeze. It was warm and dry, and it filled my chest with something that almost resembled peace. That afternoon I went back to Fermin's place and told him everything. He didn't say much, just nodded, poured us each a glass of vermouth, and raised his glass. "To clarity," he said. I clinked his glass and replied, "To survival," because that's what it had been. Not just protecting a property, but surviving a quiet war waged under my own roof. A war I didn't start, but one I refused to lose. We spent an hour going over final documents. The apartment title was reinforced with added legal clauses that prevented any unauthorized transfer. I named Fermin as my temporary legal advisor in the event of emergency. Not family, not anymore. We laughed a little at how paranoid it all felt, but neither of us said out loud what we both knew. Once someone tries to take everything from you, you don't sleep the same again. When I got home, the silence didn't hurt as much. It felt deserved. I reheated the leftover soup Alejandro never finished and ate slowly by the window. I wasn't sure if I'd ever see him again, or if I even wanted to, but I knew this. I still had my home, my mind, and a truth no one could twist. And sometimes that's enough to begin again. The following days passed like a quiet fog. No calls, no knocks at the door, just me, the ticking of the old kitchen clock, and the slow settling of everything I had just been through. It's funny, after a storm like that you expect drama, some kind of fallout or noise, but instead, life just pauses. I didn't feel triumphant, I didn't feel angry, I mostly felt numb, like I'd just walked out of a burning building and hadn't realized yet what all I left inside. I kept up my routine, though I noticed how much more I was observing everything now. The way the fruit vendor greeted me, the smell of the corridor in the morning, the light falling across the hallway at 4 p.m. There's something about coming so close to losing it all that sharpens the senses. Every detail becomes precious. Every noise feels meaningful. And even loneliness has a texture when you're fully awake in it. One morning, I sat in the park and watched a boy try to convince his grandfather to buy him a toy from the corner stand. The old man laughed, tapped his cane on the ground, and caved in after 2 minutes. I smiled, remembering how I used to do the same thing with Alejandro when he was little. Not because I thought of those days fondly, but because it reminded me that I hadn't imagined the love we once had. It had been real. That's what made this betrayal so hard to digest. Not that he fooled me, but that he had once held my heart in his hands without ever needing to ask for it. I tried to talk to Teresa at night, just in my head, just to tell her I was okay, that I'd done what needed to be done. Sometimes I imagined her shaking her head, half proud, half disappointed, not in me, but in how things turned out. She always believed in facing things head-on. I had used deception, yes, but I also knew, if I hadn't acted the way I did, I'd be homeless or worse. And the truth is, pretending to be weak gave me the strength I needed. The loneliness didn't go away, but it changed shape. It stopped being fear of being alone, and started becoming something like quiet company. I read more, cooked better meals, sat longer at the window. I didn't expect Alejandro to come back, and for a while I didn't want him to. I didn't block his number. I just didn't reach out. I needed that silence to mean something. Then, about 2 weeks later, I found an envelope under my door. No knock, no name, just my name on the front in Alejandro's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, folded neatly. No apology at the top. Just, "I've been thinking a lot, and I wanted to say this without asking you to forgive me. He went on to describe the pressure he'd been under, the sleepless nights, the feeling of drowning. He said he knew he had crossed a line that no son should cross, that he had told himself it was temporary, a necessary evil, but now he understood that even thinking of doing what he tried to do made him unworthy of my trust. The letter didn't beg, it didn't justify, it just told the truth, raw and small, and quiet. And for the first time in weeks I let myself cry, not because I forgave him, not yet, but because someone who tries to rebuild from the rubble without pretending the house wasn't burned, that's a kind of courage too. I placed the letter in the same drawer where I keep Teresa's last note to me. I didn't answer, but I didn't throw it away either. Days passed, and I kept living. That might not sound like much, but after what happened, just living, fully, attentively, felt like a quiet rebellion. I returned to the little bakery once a week. I brought back my evening walk, not because I needed the air, but because I wanted to see people again. Not to talk, just to remember that life still moved, even when trust had been broken. And slowly, things inside me started moving too. Sometimes when I sat in the park, I would catch myself glancing at my phone, half expecting Alejandro to call, but he didn't, and I didn't call either. The silence between us wasn't cold. It was suspended, like two people who had both touched something fragile and now didn't know how to hold it again. I didn't feel hatred. That surprised me. I felt caution, distance, but not hatred. One night I was going through old boxes in the closet. I'd been meaning to declutter for years. In one of them I found a Father's Day card Alejandro had made when he was 8, crayon drawings of us building a little wooden house. "You are the strongest man I know," it said. I held that card for a long time, sitting on the edge of my bed with my reading glasses fogging up. I wasn't crying. Not really. It was something quieter than that, like a mourning for what could have been if things had gone differently. That card didn't make me forget what happened, but it reminded me that love had once existed there. Real, messy, imperfect love. And that's why betrayal cuts so deep. Not because it comes from a stranger, but because it comes from someone who once made you feel safe. Still, I didn't rip the card. I put it back in the drawer with the letter. Let them sit together. Two pieces of the same truth. In the meantime, Fermin and I kept in touch. He started inviting me to little gatherings at his apartment, mostly other retired friends, domino nights, debates about politics over olives and cheap Rioja. I didn't say much the first few times, but I listened. And eventually, I laughed. A real laugh from the stomach. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I heard myself sound like that. It felt like discovering an old part of me I thought had rusted away. One evening after one of those gatherings, Fermin walked me to the elevator and said, "You look lighter." I raised an eyebrow. "I weigh the same," I joked. But he smiled. "Not there," he said, pointing at my chest. "Here." I didn't answer, but I knew what he meant. The burden was still there, but I wasn't dragging it behind me anymore. I was carrying it, with balance, with intention. That night, I went home and opened the window wide. The breeze had that September smell. Cooler now, crisp. I sat with my notebook and wrote something for the first time in years. A letter. Not for Alejandro, not for Teresa, for myself. A reminder, a reckoning. I wrote, "You are still you. They tried to make you doubt that, but you are still you." I closed the notebook and felt something lift off me, like a held breath finally exhaled. I didn't know what would happen next with Alejandro. I didn't need to. Life wasn't about resolving every fracture. Some cracks stay open, but you can still live in the house. You can still plant flowers at the windowsill. And some mornings, if the light hits right, the cracks look like lines in a story, not a wound, but proof that you made it through. A few weeks later, I ran into Maruja, my neighbor from the 3rd floor on the stairs. She's in her early 70s, always wears bright red lipstick and carries a bag that's much too heavy for her back. We exchanged a few words, and before I knew it, she had invited me to her niece's birthday lunch that weekend. "Just come. We're all old, you'll blend in," she said with a wink. I hadn't been to a family event, even someone else's, in months. I said yes. It was a simple gathering, folding chairs, tortilla, laughter in the courtyard. Nothing fancy, but it grounded me. I watched people talk over each other, children chasing balloons, music playing from a speaker that kept disconnecting. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was outside looking in. I was there, present, not as the man whose son tried to betray him, but just as Alvaro, the guy who used to fix pipes and pour concrete and dance badly at weddings. After that, I started saying yes to more things. A museum visit with Fermin, a cooking class for retired men, which turned out to be mostly about wine, even a walk with Estrella, a widow from the building next door, who had seen me around and always smiled kindly. We talked about books, our childhoods, even death, but in a way that didn't feel heavy. It felt honest, like two people who had lived enough to stop pretending. My world had cracked open, and instead of caving in, it had expanded. I was still the same man, but I wasn't standing in the same place. And I think that's what surviving something like this does to you. It moves you without you even realizing it. Like the floor shifts and suddenly you're standing closer to the window, seeing a different view. One afternoon, as I watered the little plants on my balcony, I saw Alejandro across the street. He was on the phone, pacing, shoulders tense. He didn't see me. I stood there for a long time, just watching. I didn't feel the urge to call out to him. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel anything, really, except a strange calm, like looking at a painting you used to know by heart, but no longer need to hang on your wall. He looked older, not in a dramatic way, just worn, like life had pushed him hard and he hadn't quite stood back up yet. And for a brief second I wondered what he told people when they asked about his father. Did he lie? Did he tell the truth? Did he avoid the subject altogether? I'd probably never know, and maybe I didn't need to. That night, I took the card he'd given me months ago, the one from the lawyer, and burned it on the stove. Watched the edges curl, the paper blacken and vanish. Not out of anger, just closure. It didn't belong in my drawer anymore. It had no place among them. Memories I chose to keep. And that's the thing. I was choosing again. What to keep, what to let go, what to carry forward, and what to leave behind. I couldn't control everything life threw at me, but I could decide how much space it took in my chest. And that, I realized, was the quietest kind of power a person could have. The next few weeks brought a rhythm I hadn't felt in a long time. I began waking up before the alarm, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made my coffee with care, watered the plants like they were old friends, and started leaving the radio on again while I cleaned. There was a lightness to the air in the apartment, not because the pain was gone, but because I had made peace with it. I had stopped rehearsing conversations with Alejandro in my head. I no longer pictured dramatic reconciliations or imagined him showing up with tears in his eyes. Real life isn't a movie, and sometimes the most honest ending is no ending at all. We didn't need a big scene. We just needed space, and truthfully, I needed it more than he did. One afternoon, while I was at the market choosing figs, I heard someone call my name. I turned, and there he was, Alejandro, alone. No suit, no urgency, just a son standing in front of his father, holding a plastic bag with groceries. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. We stood there in silence for a moment, surrounded by people haggling over tomatoes. Then he asked if I wanted to walk a little. I nodded. We didn't talk about what happened, not directly. He told me he'd started selling off parts of the business, that he might go back to teaching, something he once loved before he thought money had to be the only goal. I listened, not as a father waiting to forgive, but as a man listening to another man try to stand back up. And maybe that was enough for now. He didn't come back to the apartment. I didn't invite him, and he didn't ask. We parted at the end of the street with a nod, not a hug. It wasn't cold. It was respectful, like we both understood that we were starting from zero now. No debt, no promises, just a fragile, uncertain kind of truth. Later that night, I told Fermin about it. He didn't say much, just poured me a drink and said, "It's strange, isn't it? How betrayal breaks things but somehow leaves cracks wide enough for something else to grow." I nodded. "But only if you want it to grow," I said. And I wasn't sure if I did. Not yet. The days kept coming. I celebrated my 79th birthday with a small lunch at home. Maruja made tortilla. Fermin brought a bottle of wine. Estrella gave me a little plant. It was simple, quiet, and real. No big speeches, no surprises. Just people who showed up because they wanted to, not because they felt obligated. When I blew out the candle on the tiny cake, I didn't make a wish, I didn't need to. Everything I wanted was already in motion. Not perfectly, not quickly, but moving. And sometimes, just moving forward is the bravest thing a person can. Just one morning, I walked past a small community center I had passed 100 times but never entered. On a whim, I stepped inside. There was a flyer on the wall. Storytelling for seniors. Share the life behind your wrinkles. I read it 3 times. Something about that phrase pulled me in. I wrote my name down. I didn't know if I'd actually go, but it felt like saying yes to something I had once always ignored. My own story. The first session was awkward. A dozen old folks in plastic chairs, shuffling papers, sipping weak coffee. But when it was my turn to speak, something inside me opened. I didn't talk about Alejandro, not directly. I told the story of the day I laid the first tile in the apartment, of how Teresa laughed because I measured the floor 3 times but still got it slightly crooked. The room chuckled. It was a small laugh, but it carried more weight than they could have known. That night, I realized something strange. For so long, my life had revolved around preventing loss, keeping my home, my autonomy, my dignity. But now I was starting to build again. Not houses, not walls, but connections, trust in small doses. And every time I told a part of my story, I was laying a new tile. Not perfect, maybe a little crooked, but mine. One of the women in the group, Leonore, approached me after the second session. She said, "You speak like someone who has been through a war no one saw." I smiled. "We all have, haven't we?" She nodded. Then she added something I'll never forget. "The difference is you chose to talk about it instead of hiding the shrapnel." That night I slept like a stone. I didn't write to Alejandro again. He didn't write to me either. But every now and then, I'd get word from a mutual acquaintance that he was renting a small flat, that he'd started teaching part-time at a technical school, that he looked tired but was staying out of trouble. That was enough. I didn't need a play-by-play, just the knowledge that he was facing life on his own 2 feet. Fermin once asked me if I missed him, the old Alejandro, the one who used to come over every Sunday and ask for lentils. I told him the truth. I miss who he was. I don't miss who he became. That was the only way I could make peace with it. Love and boundaries aren't enemies. They coexist quietly, sometimes painfully. By November, I started volunteering twice a week at the center. Not for anything noble, just helping people write letters, fix old appliances, walk across icy sidewalks. It made the days feel fuller, not in a loud way, just solid, like when you add a stone to a quiet stream to redirect the flow. I wasn't trying to erase what had happened. I was trying to make sure it didn't define me forever. One afternoon, a younger man from the center asked why I always signed my name so slowly when filling out forms. I told him it was because I had spent a lifetime building things I thought couldn't be taken. And now, every time I write my name, I want to remember that even paper can lie if you're not careful. He laughed and said, "You're dramatic, Don Alvaro." I shrugged. "No, just precise." In early December, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. It was a simple card, blank on the outside, just a painting of 2 old hands holding each other. Inside, Alejandro had written only 1 sentence. "I don't expect to be welcomed back, but I hope you know I am trying to become someone you would be proud of again." I read it 3 times. Then I placed it beside the first letter, in the drawer where memories live, the ones that hurt but also heal. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I had nothing more to say that wouldn't undo the silence that was finally doing its work. He didn't need words from me now. He needed time. He needed effort. He needed to walk his own road without asking me to guide it. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't something you gave out like candy. It was something you lived toward, day by day. Winter settled in slowly. The air thinned. The building seemed quieter. Madrid has this way of holding still during the cold, like it waits. I found myself waiting too, but not for anyone in particular. Just watching, letting the days unfold without trying to predict them. I walked slower. I said less. But inside, there was more clarity than I'd felt in years. One evening, Estrella brought me a scarf she had knitted. "Your old one looks like it's from the war," she teased. I thanked her, and we shared a pot of tea on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one. She didn't ask about Alejandro. No one did anymore. and I was grateful for that. Not every wound needs to be reopened just to prove it's healing. I kept going to the storytelling group. By then, I had started writing things down, bringing in small pieces of memory like breadcrumbs. I didn't speak of betrayal. I spoke of dignity, of instinct, of how pretending to be sick saved me, not just from legal ruin, but from losing myself entirely. The others listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes with knowing nods. Some of them had lived their own quiet battles too. One man, Gregorio, said after one session, "It takes a different kind of strength to survive something without becoming bitter." That line stayed with me, because bitterness had knocked on my door many times. I just hadn't let it in, and that had made all the difference. Bitterness takes from you twice. First your peace, then your future. I didn't start over, I just continued. That's something people don't understand when they talk about recovery. They imagine grand reinventions. But the truth is, most healing is invisible. It looks like making lentils again, like replacing a broken hinge, like writing your name slowly and meaning it. By Christmas, I had decorated the apartment with a single string of lights across the window. No tree, no big fuss, just enough glow to remind myself that the year had turned, and I had too. I wasn't the same Alvaro who almost signed his life away. I was the one who stayed, who saw clearly, who acted even when it hurt, and most importantly, the one who endured. On New Year's Day, I woke up early. The city was still asleep. No honking, no footsteps, just the distant sound of someone sweeping confetti off the sidewalk. I made coffee and stood by the window in my robe, watching the pale blue morning settle over the rooftops. I thought of Teresa. She used to say the way you start the first day of the year sets the tone for the rest. So I whispered a quiet promise to myself. This year, I don't shrink for anyone, not even for love. Later that day, I visited the cemetery. I brought fresh flowers and a folded letter I didn't plan to read out loud, but ended up doing so anyway. It wasn't long, just a few words. I protected what we built. I stayed. I listened. I learned. And I still miss you every single day. I left the letter under a stone, kissed my fingers and touched her name. The wind was cold, but it didn't bother me. It felt clean, honest. On the way home, I stopped by the bakery and bought 2 rosquillas. Not for me. I left one at Fermin's door, a small thank you. No note. He would know. And the other I shared with Estrella later that evening, as we sat watching old movies on her tiny television with the volume a bit too high. Life wasn't exciting, but it was full again. Full in the way that matters. Alejandro didn't call that day, and I didn't expect him to. But in the afternoon, I found another envelope under my door. Inside was a photo. Old. A scanned copy of one I'd forgotten even existed. The two of us on a construction site, both wearing helmets too big for our heads, grinning like fools. On the back, he'd written, "I'm still trying." Nothing else. I stared at that photo for a long time. My first instinct was to cry, but I didn't. I smiled. Not because everything was forgiven, but because sometimes trying is the seed of everything that matters. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some messages don't require answers, just presence, just the silent agreement that both people are still here, walking parallel, even from afar. One evening in January, while having dinner with the group at the center, someone asked what I would have done differently if I could go back. I thought about it. I think I would have paid more attention to the silences, I said. Not just the words people say, but the spaces they avoid. That's where the truth usually lives. Everyone nodded, and I realized I hadn't said that for them. I'd said it for me. February brought quieter days, shorter walks, and the gentle ache of age that no medicine cures. But I didn't resent it. If anything, I honored it. My body had carried me through betrayal, grief, dignity, and choice. It had held firm when my mind doubted, and steadied me when my heart trembled. I had nothing to prove anymore, only things to preserve, slowly, tenderly. And maybe that's what this whole year had taught me, that survival isn't loud. It's not heroic or dramatic, it's quiet. It's choosing to stay, to resist the pressure to disappear, to hold your name with both hands and say, not today, not like this. And if I had to, I would do it all over again. The lie, the act, the silence, because pretending to be sick was the moment I remembered I was still alive. March arrived with early almond blossoms in the park near my building. I sat on the same bench where I used to feed pigeons and watched the petals fall like soft confessions. People passed by, some greeting me, some not. I was invisible in the best way, not ignored, but undisturbed. I had stopped trying to be understood by everyone. I had earned the right to live without explaining myself. One afternoon, while walking back from the community center, I passed a father teaching his son to ride a bike. The boy was afraid to let go. "I'm right here," the father kept saying, running alongside him. I stopped for a moment, hand resting on the low stone wall, and felt a deep ache in my chest, not from loss, but from memory. I had once said those same words to Alejandro, and even if they no longer held the same weight, they were still true back then. I didn't regret being a father. Even with everything that happened, I wouldn't rewrite that part. I gave what I had. I taught what I knew. I showed up. And in the end, that's all we can do. Show up, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because real love, I've learned, isn't about keeping someone close. It's about letting them walk away and still leaving the porch light on, just in case. One evening, I took out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote my will. Clearly, honestly, no secrets. I left the apartment to a local organization that supports elderly people who've been financially exploited. I left a few savings for Fermin and something small for Estrella and Maruja. For Alejandro, I left only one thing: the photo he sent me, framed, with a note that read, "The rest, you must build yourself." It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't punishment. It was truth. A reminder that love cannot erase consequence. That healing doesn't mean forgetting. That sometimes the most generous thing you can offer someone is the chance to begin again, without being carried. I sealed the envelope and placed it in the drawer where all my stories now lived. That drawer had become something like a museum, not of pain, but of survival. A record of all the moments I could have given up, but didn't. Of the day I faked an illness and in doing so, uncovered the truth that saved my life. People often say that old age steals your strength, but I don't believe that. What age really does is remove the need to pretend. You get to be exactly who you are, without the costume. And who I am now is a man who was tested and did not break. And if anyone asks me what I learned from all of it, I'll tell them this. Sometimes pretending to be weak is the strongest thing you'll ever do, because in that silence you see clearly. And once you see, you never unsee. I saw, I acted, and I endured. Sometimes we only truly understand what we carry when we have to protect ourselves. And even when the danger comes from where we least expect it, it's still possible to come through whole. Maybe more cautious, maybe quieter, but whole. If you made it this far, maybe you've also had to pretend strength or weakness to keep standing. Tell me in the comments if any part of this story touched you deeply. Have you ever experienced something similar with someone in your family? Have you had to choose silence as a way to survive? Sometimes, just writing it down helps find a bit of peace. If you want, share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to protect yourself, without losing who you are. Sometimes a story told at the right moment can open the eyes of the ones we love the most. And if this kind of story has helped you in any way, stick around. Sometimes all we need is a story that doesn't end with shouting, but with dignity.